Welcome everyone, and thank you for attending today's celebration of leadership with distinguished speaker and recipient of this year's John Wooden Global Leadership Award, American Express Chairman and CEO, Ken Chenault. My name is Dana Taylor. I'm a member of the class of 2010 and a very, very, very grateful recipient of the John Wooden Global Leadership Fellowship this year. We are privileged and honored to be joined here today by Mr. Chenault. You will hear more on Mr. Chenault's accolades and leadership accomplishments throughout today's conversation with UCLA Anderson Dean Judy Olian. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce to you our Dean. Dean Olian is the 8th Dean at UCLA Anderson School of Management and is the John E. Anderson Chair in Management. She began her appointment on January 1, 2006, after 5.5 years as Dean and Professor of Management at the Smeal College of Business at Penn State University. Dean Olian is also a Professor of Human Resources and Organizational Behavior and teaches a course on ethical leadership. Under Dean Olian's leadership, UCLA Anderson is executing a comprehensive strategic plan to expand the school's global presence and partnerships. Among her many accolades, Dean Olian recently served as the chairman of the Association to Advance Collegiate Schools of Business, AACSB International, the premier business accrediting and management thought leadership organization in the world. She has been widely published in journals on human resource management and business alignment of management systems, wrote a weekly syndicated newspaper column, and hosted a monthly television show on current business topics. She is a sought-after speaker and has consulted for many corporations. Please welcome Dean Olian.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. It's great to see people here, and it's my privilege and pleasure to welcome a distinguished speaker, Ken Chenault, Chairman and CEO of American Express. Later tonight, Ken will receive the second John Wooden Global Leadership Award, presented to a person who embodies the special values and humility of legendary coach John Wooden. We've established, and we're very lucky to have established this partnership with UCLA legendary coach John Wooden. And this program annually bestows now 2 John Wooden Fellowships on very selected MBA recipients, and Dana is one of those 2 recipients this year. As part of the mission of UCLA Anderson, which is leading management thinking and preparing global leaders, the Wooden program is dedicated to developing individuals into values-driven leaders, and I know each of you will be that values-driven leader. Our speaker today embodies those values, and you will be extremely impressed with his record. He enjoyed a rapid ascent at American Express. Some highlights: he joined American Express in 1981, recruited by then CEO Lou Gerstner. He worked as Director of Strategic Planning and Travel-Related Services, quickly rose to Executive VP and then President of Consumer Card and Financial Services Group, was named President of the Consumer Card Group when he was only 38 years old, appointed President and COO of Amex in 1997, became CEO of Amex in 2001, and a few months later, the chairman. Ken seems to have exhibited leadership in his DNA. When he graduated from Waldorf High School in Garden City, New York, you'll see and hear that he's a New Yorker through and through. He did so with numerous honors. He'd been class president, an honor student, the captain of the basketball, soccer, and track teams. I heard that he had played basketball with Julius Erving, Dr. J, but apparently that forced him to look elsewhere for a career. He later went on to a BA in history from Bowdoin College and a JD from the Harvard Law School. Before joining Amex, Ken was a consultant with Bain, and prior to that, an attorney with Roger & Wells. He sits on a number of boards, Procter & Gamble, IBM, is currently co-chair of the Business Roundtable and a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. He's also one of Warren Buffett's favorite leaders, which is good because Berkshire Hathaway owns 13% of Amex. Ken has many awards that recognize his public service leadership: the Phoenix House Public Service Award, the Corporate Responsibility Award from the International Rescue Committee, the Wall Street Rising Leadership Award. He was inducted into the Junior Achievement U.S. Business Hall of Fame in 2002, and Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, which is a rather unique accolade. Ken and his wife, Kathy, reside in New York with their 2 kids. He follows basketball with a passion, like Coach Wooden, and in this case, it's the Knicks. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Amex. It's the 4th largest credit card company in the US, operates in over 130 countries, issued 92 million cards currently in circulation globally, travel operations in about 2,200 locations worldwide. Had in 2008 an employment base of 66,000 with a market cap of approximately $28 billion. Last November, the company was granted approval by the Fed to convert to a bank holding company structure. It afforded Amex the access to $250 billion in bank bailout funds as the U.S. Credit issuing companies faced a credit crisis. In early 2009, Amex received $3.4 billion in a loan from the TARP fund. The government recently announced that American Express had passed the bank stress test, and it is currently in discussions to repay that $3.4 billion loan from the TARP. Amex continues to weather the crisis and deal with the difficulties of the recession. This week, it announced a layoff of 4,000 Amex employees, or 6% of its global workforce, as part of a plan to slash $800 million in costs for the remainder of the year. That's on top of $1.8 billion in prior savings. Now, Amex just did announce a positive earnings call, its last call. It did make money, though down from last year. And its stock, if you have held it, is up 40% from the beginning of 2009. A couple final highlights from Ken's leadership career. In the early 90s, with the economy weakened by the recession, the company's card business was losing customers to Visa and MasterCard, and merchants were protesting Amex fees. As president of the domestic consumer card business, Ken was instrumental in turning around the charge card business and winning back those customers. And in the first half of the 2000s, he was the initiator of the Blue Card, which was a trendy, fashionable card with a microchip allowing cardholders to make secure transactions online, especially appealing to the coveted demographic of younger people, and it really boosted the company's market share. He signed Tiger to an Amex contract, and 9 months into his role as CEO, 9/11 happened, with the World Trade Center right across the street from the company's headquarters. 11 employees lost their lives, another 8 were seriously injured, and many families in the Amex community were tragically affected. Amex's building sustained heavy damage. They were out of the building for about 8 months, but the company did not miss a beat. 4,000 employees spread throughout the town and through neighboring New Jersey, and continued business. During that time, the admiration that Ken commanded created fervent loyalty that remains till today in the company, and has probably made the company that much more resilient to any of the current problems. There's a quote that Ken uses, I think appropriated from Napoleon: "The role of a leader is to define reality and give hope." I think you'll see a lot of that today. Now, many of you have submitted questions in advance, and I have those questions, and I'll draw on those as we go along. But you'll also have time in about 15 or 20 minutes to ask your own questions. The plan is to finish before 1 o'clock in time for you to grab lunch and go to your classes. Before we start, let me take about a couple of minutes to show the video here of a brief video about American Express.
Imagine a box with the power to enrich lives. Small enough to fit in your pocket, yet large enough to hold all of your dreams. And what if this box was a portal to a more extraordinary life? Because it wasn't a box at all, but a symbol for one of the most respected brands in the world.
What you need to think about in terms of a brand is what's the emotional connection that you're trying to create.
Our partners want to be associated with American Express because what it stands for. And we, in fact, are very careful about the partners that we select. What they want is a company that understands how they think, what their needs are. What I would say to anyone coming into our company is leadership really should be provided by someone at any level of the organization in any job. You're responsible for the brand. You represent what the brand is all about.
We really are focused on trying to serve people and inspire extraordinary lives. And if I'm going to be in business, I want to be in the service business.
Over 60,000 employees, millions of customers and business partners. One mantra: to provide world-class service and personal recognition.
Please welcome Ken Chenault. Now, it's our tradition, and I'm hoping that Ken will agree to this, to, as part of our branding exercises, to provide a gift to Ken and to ask him to wear it while we conduct the interview so that we have, so that we have the right brand.
Done.
So here we go. Perfect. There.
Done.
Don't need to.
All right. Good.
You don't need to bother with that suit jacket anymore.
That's right. I'll adopt a new style here.
So let's start with some questions about leadership. Tell us about some early experiences in your career that were really learning moments for you that you carry with you today.
I guess there were two or three. I've been hundreds of learning moments, but two or three would stand out for me. The first one was that I was a director of strategic planning in our company, and that in our hierarchy was a lower middle management job. And one of the consulting assignments I had was to work on a small business called Merchandise Services that was not doing very well. It was losing money. And I went to the president of the company at that time, Lou Gerstner, and had analyzed the company. He'd asked me to take a look at it. And I said I thought the business could be turned around. And Lou said, it probably maybe can be turned around, but I think it's very, very high risk. And Ken, you're off to a good start, and I wouldn't take that risk. And I said I'd really like to do it. I asked a few other people in the company, and they all advised me not to do it. And I said, well, I'm still going to do it if you'll allow me to. And it was a fantastic experience because what I had the opportunity was to really try to motivate a group that was demoralized, to put together a strategy, to work in every aspect of the business. And it was a turnaround situation. And so for a really young person, you felt you were against the world. And in fact, we were against a lot of people in the company who wanted us to go out of business, who really didn't think that we should be part of the company. And that taught me a lot about, one, to take risks. And my view and my calculus at the time was, I'm in business to really take on challenges and to learn. And if the company won't accept that, then I should go somewhere else and do something else. And it wasn't being arrogant, but it was really saying this was a stage where I wanted to take more risk. And so it was a great learning experience. And I often emphasize to people that some of the best opportunities come from the biggest challenges. I would give you one other that was a learning experience for me on the other side of how you need to constantly figure out how you improve yourself. And so you can imagine I was feeling pretty good about the progress I was making. And I had a style where I was a very openly engaged person. But if I thought someone was not saying something that was particularly insightful or intelligent in a nice way, I would just turn off. And I didn't think people really recognized that at all. So I went through 360-degree feedback, and I got this report back that said, Ken doesn't listen if he's not interested in the issue. And that shows at the end of the day that he may not respect me or what I'm saying. And I was saying, geez, I think I'm a nice guy. I really try to avail myself of others. But when I really looked inside myself, what I recognized was that I wasn't actively listening. And that's viewed now as a strength for me, but it was an incredible wake-up call and had a major difference. And if I had not gone through that process and gotten that feedback, it would have certainly had a very negative impact later on in my career.
This is a question from one of the students. Was there a point in your career in which you said, I'm good at what I do, I can lead people? Or do you ever get to that point where you say, I'm good at what I do?
I think what's important is that I think to be successful in any endeavor, you've got to have a combination of humility, but you also have to have a level of confidence because you need to learn from experiences, you need to acquire those technical skills. So very frankly, the merchandise services experience as a general manager that I was able to turn that business around, what I clearly gained from that experience was a belief that I could manage people, I could take on complex issues, I could make trade-offs, and I think that's important. At the same token, what I also recognized was that I had a lot to learn. And I think that's always been an important balance for me, is I think you've got to really have a belief in yourself. There's no substitute for confidence, but you can't let that lead to arrogance.
Has your leadership style changed as a result of this crisis? And in the introduction, note that I spoke about the 9/11 crisis that the company went through, and of course that wasn't a single event, that was a long time. You've been through this before. Has your leadership style changed at all in this particular profound crisis that we're in?
Yeah, I think I've learned a lot through crises. In the early 90s, we had an economic downturn when I was running our card business, and that was incredibly challenging. Obviously, 9/11 was an incredibly devastating experience from both an emotional standpoint and then dealing with business issues. And one of the most important things that I've learned is you have to be decisive, but at the same time, you have to be compassionate. And I talk a lot in our organization about integrity, and for me, that's the consistency of words and actions. The fact that you are honest is not enough. What people need to see is that consistency of words and action. The situation that we're in today is unprecedented and is the most challenging situation I've ever faced in my career. And I think what you learn through different crises is the importance that you need to communicate on a consistent basis. You need to be visible. And I go back to this quote that I always use, which is really hard for any leader, is how do you define reality? How do you get it from your people? How do you analyze things? Because most people don't want to face reality. Most people want to rationalize parts of reality away, but it's not enough to analyze that. You then have to give people concrete reasons to hope. And the point I make is, if they don't trust you, they're not going to have faith in you to take the risks that you need to take. And so for this environment, what I clearly am very, very focused on is this balance between being decisive and compassionate. I don't like laying off people, but as I did in 9/11, I didn't hesitate to do it, as challenging as it was. And there were people, frankly, inside the company. 9/11 was even more emotional. So 60 days after 9/11, we laid off 11,000 people. And the reason for that was, as we analyzed what was happening to the travel industry overall, to the payments business, and we looked at what the projected growth rates would be over a 3 to 5 year period, I said, I have to focus on the company as a whole. That is exactly the situation now. We didn't do the layoffs because we wanted to make short-term earnings. But anyone who thinks that when the economy recovers, that we're going to go back to the growth rates of 2003 and 2004, you need a wake-up call. It's not going to happen. I think things will get better. I think that we'll find ways to grow. I am optimistic, but I'm also pragmatic. And I think it's very, very important that you balance off what needs to be done, but what's critical from a morale standpoint in our company, despite the issues that you faced, that we faced, is we conduct an annual employee survey every year in good times and bad times. And the survey is generally conducted in the fall. And when we conducted the survey, people were aware that layoffs were going to take place. And I had the same issue in '01 of some people said, well, Ken, should we do the survey now? Maybe we should wait till it gets behind us. I said, that's not really what it's about. We need to get feedback on how we're managing through. Now, depending on how the executives and the company is rated on that employee survey, that counts for 25% of the bonus compensation every year. And fortunately, the ratings that we had were some of the highest that we've had in years. And I think what it demonstrates is that you can lead people through adversity if you're honest and you give them the context of why the actions are being taken. But one of the most difficult, that we just did this last layoff Monday, was literally going through emails from employees saying, I understand, I admire your leadership. That doesn't make you feel good. Because the layoffs are not because people weren't performing. The layoffs were in recognition that we're in a different economic environment and we had to make those changes. But it doesn't make it easy.
Let's switch for a moment to some pure business issues. The new credit card reform bill. What's your perspective on that from an Amex business perspective and maybe from a public policy perspective?
Yeah, let me say in all candor, what I try to do when I evaluate government programs, as challenging as it is, I really try to focus on what I think is right from a public policy standpoint, and then analyze what's the impact to the company and how would I deal with it. And I think that the reality is the credit card industry needed to be reformed. And I've said over the last 2 years that I'm not going to apologize for the credit card sector and excuse them from certain excesses, lack of transparency, disclosure. So we have, in fact, recommended that transparency, disclosure be focused on, and certain practices be changed. So from a public policy standpoint, I think those changes needed to happen in the credit card sector. However, in my conversations with different politicians, what I always talk about is be aware of the law of unintended consequences. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to be in a situation to say, I didn't realize what the impact would be. The reality is, one of the broad areas that I publicly said I've had concerns about is that if you take away some of the degrees of freedom that are necessary to do risk-based pricing, it will harm the people who need credit the most. Now, we, in fact, don't operate in the subprime market. We operate in a more affluent market. And so, frankly, from a company perspective, I could take the view it's not going to affect our company, so I'm really not going to bother with it. But the reality is, my concern is that what will happen, don't worry, we can always get it dry cleaned and pressed. It'll be fine. My biggest concern is from an unintended consequence, because I think the objectives are positive, but the reality is I think that it will result in some segments of our society that need credit and the small business sector that will not have credit. If you just go through the first quarter of this year, we were one of the few credit card companies that made money. So there's a view out there that credit card companies are making all this money. The reality is, given the economic environment, given the rising credit losses, so it's a tough issue. It's a tough balance, and that's why I'm very much in favor of the level of private-public dialogue that's out there. We obviously will be supportive of the bill, but I do think it's important to point out that there will be impacts, and it's critical that those impacts be focused on so that they can be dealt with in the future.
So we're sitting in the 12th, in the state that represents 12% of the economy of the United States, and we're looking at rising credit default rates here and across the country. Are you concerned about that at Amex, and what will be your response?
Yeah, I am absolutely concerned. I think that we have a substantial percentage of our card members are in California. And obviously, California has been hit very hard by the housing crisis. Employment is a major factor. And so we're very focused on this state. And I think the issue of credit defaults is a major issue across this country. But certainly, two of the states where credit losses are at the highest level for the credit card sector and for us are California and Florida. So we closely follow what happens in California. But we also have a lot of good customers here.
American Express cards, everyone.
But pay your bills.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about executive compensation. Mm-hmm. There has been quite a lot of negative backlash against excess in that regard. How do you respond to that criticism as a member of the class and you personally? And will you be changing the structural level of your compensation as a member of the board?
Yeah, I think the reality is I think there has been excessive compensation in some companies and with some CEOs. So I think that clearly is the case. I believe very strongly that people should be paid if they perform. And I don't think it should be outrageous, but I think people should be paid for results. Now, what is interesting, because this is a complex set of issues, in the short term, because of all the issues that we were dealing with, it was a challenging year, I didn't take a bonus. Now, I don't ask for people to say, boy, that's great, because I've done pretty well over the years. But I thought it was important as a demonstration to our people that understanding the issues that we were going through, the layoffs, that I shouldn't take a bonus. What's also important is that there are different methods that people use. So last year, Fortune did an article. And the article actually was lauding a change in a compensation program that we put in for me, covering my compensation. And the way this program was set up was because I really am a strong believer that you manage in the moderate to long term, not the short term. And the board wanted to do something to recognize the future performance because of the way we had performed over the last 7 or 8 years. So they set up a 6-year program, which is pretty long. And they also set up performance standards that were at the highest end. So the reality is they looked at how we had performed. They took the highest end of the performance metrics, which I supported and felt was the right thing to do. Then they said, look, even if you hit these objectives, if you don't perform better than the S&P 500, even though you may have had earnings of 16%, 18%, you don't get a payout. So the reality is timing is everything in life. 2008 was a tough year, was a very tough year. And it is highly unlikely that that will be paid out. Warren Buffett liked the package because he said it's totally focused on performance, it's aligned with shareholders, and for the type of compensation which would have been substantial, the standards were very high. Now, from an accounting standpoint, here's something that is surprising: is if you have very clear performance metrics from an accounting standpoint, you take a charge. So what was reported was an inflated amount because in actuality, given the performance in '08, it is highly doubtful I'll be paid a cent. So the question is, the transparency is important. So here's something that was very transparent. If, in fact, the board had simply given me options with no performance criteria, they would not have had to account for it or report it in that year. So, frankly, there are a number of CEOs who didn't have those performance metrics who've just backloaded it in to the last 3 or 4 years. So I think when you evaluate and look at compensation, don't always go for the sticker number. Get behind the methodology of what was driving the numbers. And so my view at the end of the day is that you set very clear performance metrics. They have to be aligned with shareholders. And I think the best performance plan is one that is aligned over the moderate to long term, because you don't want a situation where someone can do something. That's what happened with a lot of some of the investment banks, is the focus was on a 12-month performance period. I don't think that's where you should do the big payouts.
I'll ask one more question, and please line up next to the microphone so that we can hear you if you want to ask questions. So this is, again, switching to some other interests of Amex and yours. This particularly around the nonprofit leadership academy that Amex runs. It's a nationwide program in partnership with the Center for Creative Leadership to develop the next generations in the nonprofit sector. So you're a for-profit company. What is it that drives you to be so preoccupied with nonprofits, as you are as a company?
Yeah, I'm a strong believer that corporations exist because society allows us to exist. And we, in fact, have to give back to society if we want to continue to grow. And I take that very seriously. And I'm also a very strong believer in leadership and that people can be trained to be leaders. As we analyzed the not-for-profit sector, what we found was one of the most pressing needs, aside from dollars, were trained leaders. And so we set up a program that literally brings in leaders from nonprofit organizations around the country. And we go through not only aspects of how to run a business, but how to lead. The feedback has been terrific. We're just in our second year, but it's expanding. And I believe it is going to have a terrific return on the investment that we've put in, because we are really developing leaders who are going to make a major difference in the non-for-profit world. And second, we're really drawing a connection between the for-profit world and the nonprofit world that I think is very important.
Please keep your questions brief. Go ahead.
Thank you for taking the time and coming out here. I'm actually an alum. I worked for Jim Robinson when he first came to the company.
Good.
I'd be interested in your thoughts on how you manage because you're transaction-driven, travel, TCs, and the card, how you're going to manage in a high inflation, high interest rate, low growth economy.
Yeah, here's how we're going to do
Thank
it. What I think is important as we look at our business model, which I think is very different from the traditional bank card model. We make approximately 80% of our revenues from the card fee, so we're really pricing for value, and the fee we charge merchants. For banks who are in the credit card business, 60 to 70% of their revenues are spread revenues. So the model is very, very different. Some of the ways that we're managing through is, one, we've said our expense model has to be different. And so we're making major changes to our business model over a multi-year period. Second, service is critical, because I got to tell you, in these times, and uncertain times, and I've seen it through every downturn, is if you can be there for your customers, if you can provide them a high level of service, the loyalty that you build up over time is substantial. So one of the things we're doing is focusing on existing customers. And what are we doing to help them out, to help them in their business or their personal life? Third area that is very important for us is that we have developed a partnership strategy which allows us to limit the level of capital that we put in certain markets to grow. So for example, in China, we have a partnership with the largest bank in China, ICBC, that issues Amex branded cards. They have the credit risk. We work with them on the marketing side. It has been a very successful effort. We now have over 150 bank partnerships around the world. And that is important because it gives us scale and relevance in a profitable way. And so we're not taking on that risk. The last area is we're focusing on innovation. This is where I think companies make a big mistake in a downturn. And a downturn is when you should be innovating and when you should be having those creative ideas come out. So increasingly for us, I really see our card product as, in fact, a platform to deliver a range of services online and offline. And so that's something that we are really building, and we're going to be very focused on the years to come. So I think in very, very simple terms, I have three operating principles that I set up when we ran the card business that Harvey Golub, when he was CEO of the company, adopted for the whole company. And it's just provide superior value to the clients and customers you serve, do it in a way that allows you to achieve best-in-class economics. And everything you do must support and enhance our brand, because our brand is incredibly valuable. And I'll give you one example. As challenging as these times are, one of the things we found is that when Lehman collapsed, the commercial markets collapsed and the wholesale funding market collapsed, and we depended on wholesale funding. In a period of 8 months, we were able to raise $18 billion of retail deposits, CDs, through third-party brokers who actually sold against some of their own products without spending a cent on advertising. And that really bespeaks to the confidence and trust that people have in our brand. So those are some of the ways we're trying to navigate through these treacherous waters.
Thank you so much for coming out. I wanted to ask you if we could circle back to the credit card legislation.
Yes.
The unintended consequences, do you think it's going to impact the low-income consumer, or it's going to be more negative towards young people that are just starting to build credit?
Yeah, my big concern is the low-income consumer. I think it will impact young people to an extent, but it depends on what income bracket they're in. And the group that I'm most concerned about is the group that needs it. So it's low income, and just think about that small business person that's trying to be self-sufficient, and whether they're going to have the opportunity to get that loan that they need. And I want to be clear here. I think the president is very focused on this issue, and I think he's trying to do the right thing. But what I do believe is that there needs to be an understanding that there will be certain segments of our society that when this bill is passed, then what I would ask, what are some of the other government programs doing to help that segment that may not have access to credit?
Thank you. Adam.
Thanks for coming. My apologies about your Knicks. Quick question.
It's a sorry state.
Yeah, you came to the right state for basketball.
Right, that's for sure.
My question was in regard to the chatter about the credit card industry being next in line for federal bailout money. Some thoughts you had on kind of that discussion and the unique role that Joe Biden, who's known as the credit card senator, might play in those discussions, and whether he may need to be in a position to recuse himself from such talks.
Yeah, I would say that I don't think that that's a high probability. What I think is important, if we go back, and I will tell you, it was October of '08 was chilling. You talk about a free fall. I mean, the commercial markets, the capital markets had closed up. To just go back in recent history, in October of '08, when I believe Paulson came out with TARP, here was the difference. And literally, if you go back and read some of the articles, if you were not a TARP company, that meant you were not a healthy company. And the view was those companies that did not qualify to be part of TARP because they were viewed that they weren't healthy enough, they were in trouble. What happened was, in fact, the collapse of AIG and the problems with Citi. The stigma that came over TARP was powerful. But my view is that that program was always a temporary program. And what is, I think, very important and demonstrates progress is that you now have a number of companies like ourselves who have said, we want to pay it back as soon as possible. And the reality is the U.S. taxpayer, by the time you calculate what the payback will be, the U.S. taxpayer will have earned between a 5 to 25% return on their investment. In this market, 25% return or a 25% return in any market is excellent. And very frankly, my view is I'd like some of that money then redirected to people whose homes are being foreclosed on. That would be a very good sign because we needed to stabilize the financial system. That was important. So I think that having gone through, a number of the largest credit card issuers have gone through the stress test. Most of them did decently to very good on the stress test. So my view is it's highly unlikely that the credit card sector will need to be bailed out in some way, shape, or form. And what I hope is, in fact, over the next several weeks and the next several months, that you'll see companies repaying the TARP money, and then the word getting out for the U.S. taxpayer of what the return was, that they actually earned money on that investment. And that should be an important demonstration that things are starting to improve. That said, those are the financial systems issues. What needs to be focused on is the overall economy and clearly employment. And that's where I think there needs to be a much stronger focus.
So in the interest of time, I'm going to ask the questioner to be brief, the answerer to be brief. Yours will be the last, and then I'll preserve my right as moderator for the last two questions.
That's unfair, but that's okay. We have a mentor in common, and Ed Lloyd took responsibility to tell me, make sure I completed the message to you that he taught you everything you know.
Right.
So I just want you to acknowledge that. No, seriously. I'm as proud of you as I am of Barack Obama, and you could certainly be the next president if you felt like it, and you've been under the radar screen for a long time. But seriously, between you, Richard Parsons, Stanley O'Neill, also Ed Lloyd, student athletes, you're at a university that turns out great student athletes. It's not easy to get into UCLA. I'm a father of 4 girls. How do you what's your message for young women today? Because obviously you got Kobe Bryant's ice in your veins to lead a company in these times, like Barack. What do you tell the young women in the audience to be prepared for the future, to balance a career, to balance a family, etc.? That's all I got to say. Welcome to California. Go
Well, thank you. It's great to see you again. We actually spent some time, I believe, in Maine, right? And it was great. Let me just one thing. I'm probably not the best person to give a perspective on it, but let me say in all seriousness that what I think is absolutely tremendous is what has happened over the last 25 years. And the reality is, I'm sure at this business school, any business school, the composition and the percentage of women has risen dramatically. And
Not sufficiently.
Not sufficiently. But what I think is important, and this is something that I talk about in our company, is that what's going to be essential is that percentage follows through as they go into companies and move up the hierarchy. And that's going to be very, very critical. What I would emphasize is, from my experience, is don't listen to the skeptics. Because I will tell you, when I joined the company, I'd either get it firsthand or secondhand, is you can be here maybe for around 3 or 4 years, and you really should do something else, because it's just not gonna work out. And I think what you need to decide on, most importantly, what I would say is, what are your passions? What is it that you want to do? Then obviously get the training to make that happen. But the most important thing is to keep your confidence and to keep your balance, because I think when you're trying to break barriers, it's all about keeping balance and focus. And I think that the door has been opened enough. I would agree with the dean, far more people need to get through that door, but the door has been open. And what is absolutely critical is don't listen to someone who will tell you it's not your time. The reality is it is your time. Demographics are in your favor. And the reality is you've got to push for those opportunities.
I apologize to the folks that we didn't get to. Building on that question, my second to last question, I think when you were made CEO, you were one of only 3 African-American CEOs in the Fortune 500. I don't know if
Right.
that's risen.
It has risen some. I think the number is around 9 or 10, and in fact today, someone who is on our board, a black woman named Ursula Burns, at 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, was named CEO of Xerox.
Oh, wonderful. Congratulations.
Ursula is a good friend and has been on our board for several years, and I will tell you, personifies the attitude. Ursula grew up in housing projects in Bronx, and nothing was going to stop Ursula. And people would tell her at each juncture, you don't belong here, you can't move into this area, and she just pushed on.
So from a workforce perspective, crystallize why diversity is a value.
I come at it from 2 or 3 vantage points. The first, and why I'm really impressed with the philosophy of this school, is all around values. At the end of the day, I don't want to be part of an organization that is not open to a vast array of people with a vast array of differences, because I think that's important for our society and the learning experience and to grow as a person. So that's a value that is strong. Secondly, you got to be brain dead not to look at the marketplace. The marketplace is incredibly diverse. So very frankly, I'm always mystified when it comes to diversity. People seem to lose the capacity to use logic. And any analysis that I've seen is you look at your marketplace and then in fact you try to address what those needs are. So we live in a very diverse marketplace globally, locally, and the more people that in fact we can create products and services for, and what every great company tries to do in great brand, anyone who studies brands knows that the way you build the strongest brand is you have rational appeal and you have an emotional connection. If you're viewed as a company that doesn't have that emotional connection, you're missing out on a terrific set of business opportunities, but you're missing out on a strong brand. And so I think that the business justification is there, but I also think that you really have to consciously decide what you want to stand for in business in general. And my view is I stand for opportunity.
Last question. If you were graduating today, how would you differentiate yourself? How would you approach the marketplace from this great MBA program?
Yeah, here's, in all honesty, I'd be nervous. I'd be anxious. But, you know, I will tell you when I got out of school, there wasn't the same level of downturn, but the environment was not robust. And what I would urge you to do is, in a lot of cases, in a good economy, you're almost on automatic pilot, right? Because people say, look, you can go into this field, you can go into this field, your friends are doing it, and you just do it. This environment really causes you to think about yourself. What do you stand for? What are your interests? And you don't need to follow the traditional path because that may not exist this year. What I would say to you is this is temporary. But I would look at nonprofits. A friend of mine was telling me his son went into the Peace Corps, not because he was forced to, but he said, you know, I always wanted to do it. I actually thought I was going to go into investment banking, but there was no jobs there. But the question is, what can you learn from a management standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, how you handle people? So I would urge you to use your creativity to think about what are your passions, and then figure out a way and a pathway for you to realize those passions, number one. Number two is, this is not permanent. You know, and I'll give you just a story from my first year as CEO. Someone said to me, Ken, you couldn't have picked a worse year. I mean, the economy's in bad shape. He had to deal with 9/11. The toll is unbelievable. And I said, I look at it this way. I'd rather it happen in the early part than at the end. And that's really the way I think about it, is that This is the start, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This is the worst economic environment that anyone has ever seen. But you're in this for the long term. And I will tell you, in business and life, if you're going to let this environment set you back and put you in a frame of mind that it's over, then you weren't on the road to success. So you should be concerned, you should be anxious, scary, but I think you got the tools, the skills, and the capabilities to get through if you open up your mind and you take some risk and you be creative and not say, I had a 10-point list, and if I don't get all those 10 things, it's not going to work out for me. I think you then need to revise that list. You can still have your long-term list.
Thank you for being inspired.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.